My brother's laugh cut through the ballroom before his words did. Loud, confident. The kind of laugh that makes people turn their heads because they assume something important is about to be said. Then he pointed at me with his champagne glass and said, "That's my sister. Yeah, the one who never figured life out." The room went quiet in that fake, polite way rich rooms do. 200 people in tailored suits and designer dresses froze mid-sip. Someone actually stopped chewing. Another person whispered, "Oh wow," like they were watching a live car crash they couldn't look away from. I stood there in the only outfit I'd agonized over for days. Dark jeans, a clean blouse, nothing flashy, nothing embarrassing. My heart slammed against my ribs as heat rushed to my face. A few people laughed, not openly, not cruelly, just enough to let me know they were choosing his side without asking questions. My brother lifted his glass higher, enjoying the moment. His merger party, his night, and I was the punchline. Then I saw my mother. She didn't laugh. She didn't stop him either. She gave that familiar, tight smile, the one that says, "I agree, but I won't say it out loud." The same look she's worn my whole life whenever my brother put me back in my place. That hurt worse than the laughter. Let me rewind for a second. My name is Claire. I'm 35 years old, and according to my family, I'm the one who never made it, the underachiever, the hands-on one, the sibling who chose the long road instead of the impressive one. If you asked anyone in that ballroom who I was, they'd tell you I do manual work, that I'm still figuring things out, that I probably need help. Here's what they didn't know. I own a company with operations in multiple states. I employ dozens of people full-time. Last year, we crossed 8 figures in revenue. This year, we secured a government contract worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. My work has been featured in industry magazines they'd recognize if they bothered to look. I manage budgets bigger than the deal my brother was celebrating that night. I never told my family any of this. Not the money, not the growth, not the awards, not the fact that every Friday I approve payroll that could buy a house in most parts of the country. I thought, stupidly, that one day they'd respect me without needing a headline or a number attached. That they'd care because I was their daughter, their sister, not because I finally won. Turns out, that was wishful thinking. My brother is 3 years older than me and has been treated like a prodigy since college. Finance guy, big titles, bigger ego. In our house, that meant he could do no wrong. Every holiday somehow turned into a highlight reel of his promotions, his bonuses, his important meetings with important people. And me, still doing that thing you do? Still working with your hands? When are you going to get a real job? I stopped correcting them a long time ago. Explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand is exhausting. So when my brother called and insisted I attend his merger party, I should have trusted my gut. He warned me not to embarrass him, not to talk too much about my work, to remember that this was his night. I almost didn't go. But here's my problem. I still loved him. Or at least I loved the version of him I grew up with. The kid who used to protect me. The brother I thought would never cross certain lines. That night, in front of everyone who mattered to him, he proved me wrong. I really do love my brother. That's the messed up part no one ever sees. Somewhere under the ego, the titles, and the tailored suits is the kid who used to sneak me snacks when mom wasn't looking. The teenager who taught me how to drive in an empty mall parking lot and yelled at me for slamming the brakes too hard. The brother I thought would always have my back, even when the rest of the world didn't. That version of him is why I said yes to the invitation, even though every instinct in my body told me it was a bad idea. I spent 3 full days stressing over what to wear. Not because I cared about impressing anyone, but because I knew, no matter what I chose, it would somehow be wrong. Too dressed up, and I'd be accused of trying too hard. Too casual, and I'd be the embarrassment who didn't understand how real events worked. I finally settled on dark jeans, a clean, neutral blouse, and the only heels I own that don't feel like medieval torture devices after 20 minutes. Practical, neutral, safe. Or so I thought. When I walked into the ballroom, I actually felt a flicker of hope. I know, rookie mistake. For a split second, I wondered if maybe this night would be different. Maybe my brother would introduce me like a normal human being. Maybe I'd get to have small talk that didn't involve someone asking when I planned to move on with my life. Maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't feel like the unpaid entertainment. Then I noticed the room. The venue was stunning. Polished stone floors, warm lighting, the low hum of expensive conversations floating through the air. And that's when it hit me. The space, the layout, the custom water feature along the wall. I knew this place. Not because I'd Googled it, because I'd built it. My company had designed and executed the entire renovation just over a year earlier. The outdoor terrace, the sustainable installations, the layout everyone was complimenting like it appeared by magic. There was even a small plaque near the entrance with our firm's name on it. I watched guests walk past it without reading a word, including my brother. I grabbed a champagne flute and headed for a corner, already planning my exit strategy, when I spotted my mother sweeping across the room. She made a beeline straight for my brother, like gravity pulled her there. She hugged him tightly, beaming like she was the one who'd closed the deal. When she finally noticed me, I got a quick wave and a look that clearly said, "Please don't ruin this." No, how are you? No, you made it. Just instructions, silent and familiar. I hadn't even finished my first sip when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around, and there he was, my ex, the one who dumped me years ago because I was going nowhere. He smiled like we were old friends, instead of two people who hadn't spoken since he'd walked out convinced he was upgrading his future. He looked different. Not better, just different, like money had tried to fix insecurity and done a rushed job. Before I could escape, my brother clinked his glass and pulled me closer, that plastic smile already in place. I knew what was coming before he opened his mouth, and somehow that made it worse. When he introduced everyone else with warmth and pride, then gestured toward me like an afterthought, the laughter landed exactly where he wanted it to. I stood there frozen, smiling politely while my chest felt like it was caving in. But here's what years of being underestimated teaches you. You stop reacting, you start watching. And that's when I noticed the cracks. The way my brother kept checking his phone like it might explode. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he drank too fast for someone who claimed to be relaxed. Something was off, and I wasn't the only one who saw it. Across the room, an older man watched my brother with quiet focus, not laughing, not clapping, studying. When our eyes met, he lifted his glass slightly. No smile, just acknowledgement. I had no idea who he was yet. I just knew he wasn't here for the jokes. The party rolled on like nothing had happened. Vanessa floated in with her perfectly sharpened compliments. My ex kept circling like he was auditioning for relevance. My mother reminded me twice that my brother was under a lot of pressure. And my brother? He soaked it all in, convinced he was untouchable. I kept my mouth shut. I kept my eyes open. And I waited. Because some nights aren't about defending yourself. They're about learning exactly where the weak points are.
The laughter moved on faster than I expected. That's the thing about rooms full of powerful people. Humiliation is just background noise as long as it isn't happening to them. My brother's joke had already evaporated into the buzz of networking chatter and clinking glasses. I was yesterday's headline before the night had even settled. I stood there, smiling, nodding, pretending my ribs weren't tight enough to snap. That familiar weight settled in my chest, the one I'd carried since childhood, the one that whispers, "You don't belong here, even when you know you do." I took another sip of champagne I didn't want and tried to blend into the wallpaper. That's when Vanessa appeared. She had a gift for timing, always did. She slid up beside me like she was doing me a favor, her voice sweet enough to rot teeth. "You look comfortable," she said, eyes flicking over my outfit like she was evaluating furniture. "Very you, very practical." She smiled like she'd just handed me a gift wrapped in barbed wire. I returned it, calm, polite. "Thanks. You look expensive." She blinked, unsure whether to take offense. Vanessa never could tell when I was being sincere. I considered that one of my quiet victories. The next 45 minutes felt like social boot camp. My ex popped up wherever I tried to stand, talking down to me with that familiar tone, half advice, half ego. He kept suggesting I pivot my career, like my life was a startup that hadn't scaled properly. My mother cornered me twice to remind me that my brother was nervous and that I should be supportive instead of hiding. And my brother himself strutted around the room like a guy who'd never once been told no. But I wasn't hiding. I was observing. I watched him pitch his story to potential partners. Big promises, buzzwords, synergy, expansion. All the right language with none of the substance. He spoke fast, smiled wide, and glossed over details like they were speed bumps. The executives he was trying to impress nodded politely, but I noticed the looks they exchanged. Short glances, raised brows, subtle frowns. The kind of nonverbal conversation you only catch if you're used to reading rooms for a living. Then I saw my father. He was sitting near the window, half out of the flow of the party, his hands folded in his lap like he wasn't sure what to do with them anymore. He looked smaller than I remembered, frailer. His suit hung loosely on his shoulders like it belonged to a different man. My mother stood over him, whispering sharply, correcting him mid-sentence when he tried to speak. He nodded along, distant, confused. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I started toward him, but my brother intercepted me fast, too fast. "Not now," he hissed, smile locked in place. "Dad's fine, don't start anything." I told him I just wanted to say hi. He brushed it off, telling me to mingle, to be useful, to talk to my ex about smaller opportunities. Smaller, lower tier, like he was throwing crumbs and calling it generosity. I let him steer me away because arguing would have drawn attention, and I wasn't ready for that yet. My ex launched into another monologue about investments, leaning in like he was letting me in on insider secrets. He said he'd always believed in my potential, that I just needed the right guidance. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I nodded and mentally calculated how many of his assets I could buy outright. The number surprised even me. That's when Vanessa's voice carried across the room. She was holding court near the bar, talking just loud enough to be heard. "She's sweet," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "A bit simple, works with her hands. You know how family is, you can't choose them." The women around her laughed politely. My mother stood there too. She didn't laugh. She didn't defend me either. She studied the ceiling like she was admiring the architecture. Something inside me cracked. Not shattered, cracked, like ice before it gives way. I needed air. I slipped out onto the terrace, the noise of the party muffling behind the glass doors. The cool night air hit my skin, carrying the scent of jasmine and damp stone. My work, every line, every plant, every detail. I leaned against the railing and breathed, grounding myself in something real. That's when the older man joined me. He stood beside me without invading my space, hands in his pockets, gaze drifting across the terrace. "Beautiful work," he said, casually, "especially the water feature." I thanked him out of habit. He smiled. "You designed this, didn't you?" I turned to look at him. Really look this time. And just like that, the night shifted.
The man didn't rush the silence. That alone told me he wasn't like the others inside. He leaned on the railing beside me, not too close, not too far, like someone who understood personal space without needing it explained. Silver hair, relaxed posture, the kind of confidence that doesn't announce itself. His clothes were simple but expensive in that quiet way. No logos, no flash, just quality. The type of guy who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "You recognize the design?" I asked carefully. He smiled, not wide, just enough. "I recognize good work. Morrison Park had the same signature. Clean lines, patience in the layout. Whoever did that understood how people actually move through a space." My stomach tightened. "You've been to Morrison Park?" "I've read about it," he said. "Industry pieces, awards coverage. I pay attention." He turned to me then, really looked at me. "You're Claire, founder of your firm?" Hearing my name spoken like that, without pity, without sarcasm, hit harder than I expected. "That's right," I said. He extended his hand. "My name's Henry, retired, spent most of my career in finance." His grip was firm, steady, not performative. "I know your brother's world." That sentence landed heavier than anything he'd said so far. He glanced back through the glass doors towards the ballroom. My brother was holding court again, laughing a little too loudly, clapping someone on the shoulder a little too hard. "Your brother's not as comfortable as he wants everyone to think," Henry said quietly. "You noticed that, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Henry nodded. "He's checking his phone too often, drinking too fast, selling himself instead of the product." He exhaled slowly. "That merger he's celebrating, it's an exit, and not a clean one." The night air felt colder. "You're saying he's in trouble?" "I'm saying his company's been under scrutiny for a while, federal level, financial irregularities. Nothing public yet, but it's coming." He paused. "The firm he's joining thinks they're acquiring talent. What they're really buying is time." I stared at the reflection of the ballroom lights shimmering in the water feature. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "He's the golden child. He always lands on his feet." Henry's voice softened. "People who land on their feet too often stop checking the ground." I swallowed. "Why are you telling me this?" He followed my gaze back inside, to my father, still sitting alone, still looking lost. "Because I've seen this pattern before," Henry said. "When pressure builds, people reach for whatever's closest, and the closest thing is usually someone who trusts them completely." My chest tightened. "You think my brother is using my father?" "I don't think, I suspect, and suspicion is enough to start asking the right questions." Memories surfaced. Dad mentioning money being tight, Mom brushing it off, a few vague comments about paperwork Gregory was handling. I assumed it was normal aging stuff, investment fluctuations, nothing serious. Henry handed me a business card, plain, no flashy title, just a name and a number. "I'd look into it quietly," he said. "No confrontations, no family meetings, just facts." "And if you're right?" I asked. His eyes met mine. "Then your brother's house of cards is already wobbling. The only question is who gets crushed when it falls." He left me there on the terrace, surrounded by my own work, staring at a truth I wasn't ready to accept but couldn't ignore. Inside, laughter spilled out into the night like nothing had changed, like nothing was wrong. I didn't go back in right away. When I finally did, the party was winding down. People were saying their goodbyes, congratulating my brother, shaking hands, exchanging cards. He looked relieved to see me return, like he'd worried I'd disappear before fulfilling my role as background decoration. I smiled, nodded, played along. But that night, when I got home, sleep never came. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Henry's words looping in my head. Federal scrutiny, escape merger, pressure, trust. My father's vacant eyes replayed like a warning sign I'd missed too many times. I knew that feeling, the one where your gut tightens and refuses to let go. At 6 a.m, I stopped fighting it. I pulled on jeans, grabbed my keys, and drove to one of our job sites. The crew was already there, moving with quiet efficiency, setting stone, checking levels, doing real work. I sat in my truck and watched the sun rise over the site, the rhythm of honest labor steadying my thoughts.
That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I wasn't going to accuse anyone. I was going to find the truth, and I was going to do it the same way I'd built everything else in my life, slowly, carefully, with receipts. I didn't go home after the job site. I stayed longer than I needed to, watching the crew work through the morning like they always did, focused, efficient, no drama. Stone by stone, measure twice, cut once. There's something grounding about being around people who can't fake competence. Either the work holds or it doesn't. No spin, no excuses. By mid-morning, I knew exactly what my first move had to be. I called Henry. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been expecting it. That didn't calm me. It confirmed what I already suspected. "Tell me everything you can," I said. No emotion, no backstory, just facts. Henry was careful. He didn't speculate. He stuck to what was already circulating quietly in financial circles. Audits that didn't add up, returns that looked too clean, numbers smoothed out a little too perfectly. The kind of stuff that doesn't mean anything until it means everything. By the time we hung up, my hands were shaking. I sat there in my truck for a long minute, staring at the steering wheel. My brother being arrogant, that I could handle. My brother being reckless, that wouldn't have shocked me. But my brother being desperate enough to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed, that was new territory. That afternoon, I called my father. I kept my voice light, casual, like nothing was wrong. Asked about his garden, asked if he was eating well. He sounded distracted, answering half questions with half answers. When I mentioned finances, nothing accusatory, just conversational, his tone shifted. "Gregory's handling that now," he said. Like it was obvious, like it was settled. Easier. That word stuck. I asked who had access to his accounts. He hesitated, then said it. Power of attorney. Just like that. No pause, no concern. Like handing over control of his entire life was the most natural thing in the world. I ended the call with a smile in my voice and dread in my chest. Within minutes, I was dialing my attorney. She'd handled my business for years. Contracts, disputes, expansions. She knew me well enough to hear the edge in my tone immediately. When I laid it out, slowly, carefully, she went quiet. That kind of quiet professionals reserve for moments that change everything. "If you're right," she said finally, "this isn't just family drama. This could be elder financial abuse." The word landed hard. She warned me to be careful. If I was wrong, I could blow my family apart permanently. If I was right, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. She recommended a private investigator, someone who didn't get sentimental, someone who followed paper trails, not feelings. I called him that same hour. Gruff voice, straight shooter. He didn't care about my family dynamics. He cared about facts. "Give me 2 weeks," he said, "and be prepared not to like what I find." While he worked, I did my own digging. Public records, property filings, quiet calls. It didn't take long to find the first crack. A lien on my father's house, filed months ago. A house he'd owned outright for decades. Suddenly leveraged, suddenly collateral. My hands trembled when I closed the browser. 3 days later, I drove to my parents' place. Not to confront, to observe, to see for myself. What I found made my stomach drop. Dad was worse. Confused, forgetful. Mom answered questions for him before he could finish speaking. When I got him alone, he couldn't tell me how much money he had or where it was. He just repeated the same line like a script. "Gregory knows what he's doing." I left with tears in my eyes and something colder than anger in my chest. When the investigator called back, his voice was flat, clinical. The numbers were worse than I had imagined. Transfers, loans, insurance policies cashed out. Hundreds of thousands gone. Over time, quietly, strategically. I sat in my office after the call, staring at the wall covered with project timelines and awards, and realized something important. My brother didn't see me as a threat. He never had, and that was his biggest mistake. I started planning. Not revenge, not drama, a solution. Because when someone builds their life on lies, the smartest move isn't to knock the structure down. It's to wait until they invite everyone inside.
Once I had the facts, everything shifted. Fear burned off first, then doubt. What was left was focus, the kind that narrows your vision until there's only one thing in front of you and no room for distractions. I've always worked best like that. When a project goes sideways, you don't panic, you don't argue, you assess, adjust, and execute. I built what I jokingly called my war room in the spare bedroom. Bank statements, property records, timelines, copies of filings the investigator had flagged. I taped everything to the wall, color-coded and dated until the story told itself without emotion. The pattern was undeniable. Slow siphoning, strategic timing, just enough distance between transactions to avoid raising alarms. My brother hadn't panicked when he started, he'd planned. That realization hurt more than the theft. I called Henry again. He listened without interrupting, then let out a long breath. "That lines up," he said, "and it explains the merger pressure." He told me the firm my brother was joining had a reputation for being cautious, almost paranoid about due diligence, which meant of one of two things. Either they hadn't finished looking yet, or they'd been shown a very selective version of the truth. That's when the idea formed. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a contact from a federal project my company had worked on, Financial Crimes Division. We weren't friends, but we'd earned each other's respect. When I explained what I had, there was a pause on the line. Then, "Send me everything." The next few weeks were the most disciplined of my life. I didn't slip. I didn't hint. I didn't react when my brother called, bragging about timelines and future plans. I congratulated him, played the role, even sent flowers to his wife with a polite note. My mother was suspicious at first, then thrilled. She thought I'd finally come around, thought I'd accepted my place. I let her believe it. Behind the scenes, coordination was happening, quietly, methodically. No sirens, no confrontations, just alignment. Timing mattered. If my brother got spooked, he could run, and then everything would be harder. He called me the night before the dinner he'd planned. His voice sounded strained, tighter than usual. He asked for a loan, $50,000, said it was temporary, said the merger would fix everything. Even then, even desperate, he couldn't resist minimizing what I'd built. "You've done okay. You must have something saved." I told him I'd think about it. I spent that night finalizing safeguards for my father, trusts, legal protections, care arrangements. I wasn't waiting for courts to fix what could be fixed immediately. Some things don't need permission. The venue was upscale, predictable, white tablecloths, quiet lighting, the kind of place where deals get done because no one raises their voice. I arrived composed, dressed simply, confident. My brother barely noticed me, already scanning for approval. The room filled, his new partners, his wife, my parents, familiar faces from his orbit, and then Henry arrived. I watched recognition ripple across the table as his name landed, subtle shifts, straightened postures. Suddenly, my presence mattered in a way it never had before. My brother noticed too. His smile tightened. Something flickered behind his eyes. Dinner progressed. Small talk, polite laughter. My brother gave a speech about vision and success and hard work. He gestured toward me near the end, making a joke at my expense. The table laughed politely. I smiled and sipped my wine. Then Henry stood. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't accuse. He slid a folder across the table to my brother's partners and said, calmly, "Before we toast to the future, there's something you should review." The room changed instantly. As pages turned, faces drained of color. Questions came fast. Answers didn't. My brother tried to spin it. Old numbers, misunderstandings, temporary discrepancies. His hands shook. And then his phone rang. He answered, listened, went pale. 2 agents entered the room quietly. No spectacle, just presence. They introduced themselves, asked him to stand, and explained they had questions about financial fraud and elder abuse. My brother looked at me like I'd betrayed him. I stood, met his gaze. "You did this," I said softly. "I just stopped protecting you from it." The room was silent as he was led away. I felt no triumph, just relief. Because some battles aren't about winning. They're about ending something that never should have existed in the first place. Time moved strangely after they took him away. Not fast, not slow, sideways. Like the room was still there, the table still set, the wine still half full, but the version of reality we'd all been operating under had been quietly removed. Conversations restarted in whispers, chairs scraped, phones appeared in hands. Everyone suddenly had an urgent message to send or a call they needed to step out for. My mother was frozen, not crying, not yelling, just staring at the empty space where my brother had been sitting, like if she stared long enough he'd reappear and everything would snap back into place. My father looked confused, frightened, and very small. I moved to his side instinctively and took his hand. He squeezed it like he was grounding himself through me. "I didn't know," he kept whispering. "I didn't know." "I know," I said, and I meant it. The agents were calm, professional. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just quiet efficiency. That somehow made it worse. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be laughed off later. This was real. This was documented. This was done. My brother's wife stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. She didn't look at me, she didn't look at my parents. She pulled out her phone and walked away, already dialing. I heard the word lawyer before the door closed behind her. I didn't blame her. When a foundation cracks, self-preservation kicks in fast. My ex, still sitting there, still stunned, finally found his voice. He asked me if what I'd said was true, about the company, the size, the contracts. I nodded once, that was all. He stared at me like he was recalculating every decision he'd ever made. I wished him well and turned away. Henry stayed seated, finishing his drink like a man who'd seen this play out before. He gave me a small nod. Respect, not approval. There's a difference. The weeks that followed were relentless. Statements, calls, meetings, lawyers coordinating quietly between jurisdictions. My brother's name started appearing in the news, stripped of polish and context. No longer a success story, just another cautionary tale. The merger collapsed overnight. His accounts were frozen, his assets locked down pending investigation. I refused every interview request. I had work to do. The first thing I handled was my father's security, financial, legal, medical, trust structures put in place, oversight assigned, professionals, not family. I wasn't going to let sentiment override safety ever again. I paid off the lien on the house myself. No waiting, no conditions. Some things shouldn't be dragged through courtrooms if you can prevent it. My father improved once the pressure was gone. Confusion eased. Appetite returned. He started spending mornings in the garden again, hands in the dirt, focused on small things that made sense. He called me a few times a week just to talk, about the weather, about a neighbor's dog, about nothing at all. Those calls mattered more than anything that came out of that mess. My mother and I had one long conversation, not an apology, not forgiveness, just truth. She admitted she'd trusted confidence over consistency, titles over evidence. She said she never understood what I did because it didn't sound impressive to her. She said she should have asked more questions. It wasn't closure, but it was a beginning. Work stabilized me. It always had. I went back to job sites, walked projects, solved real problems, watched my team do what they did best, build things that lasted. I'd created something honest, something that didn't vanish the moment people stopped believing in it. Henry and I met for lunch once a week after that. He didn't gloat, didn't dwell. He offered perspective, introductions, quiet guidance. He said watching someone like my brother collapse under his own shortcuts was inevitable. People don't fall because someone pushes them. They fall because there's nothing solid underneath. Months later, the legal processes were still ongoing. Sentences weren't final, outcomes weren't public, but the truth was already out. That was enough. I stood on one of our completed sites one morning, watching water arc cleanly into stone basins, sunlight catching in the spray. My boots were dusty, my hands rough. My phone buzzed with a new project inquiry. Big one. I answered it calmly. Because in the end, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing to a lie that was never mine to carry. The fallout didn't explode the way people imagine these things do. There were no dramatic apologies, no sudden revelations of loyalty, just distance, silence, awkward pauses where confidence used to live. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm, when everyone is walking around checking what's still standing. My brother stopped calling. Not that he'd called much before, but this time it was final. No late-night voicemails, no angry texts, no attempts to explain. Lawyers spoke for him now. Carefully chosen words delivered through carefully chosen channels. He was fighting what he could fight and avoiding what he couldn't. I didn't envy him. I didn't hate him either. I was just done carrying the weight of what he'd become. People from his world drifted away fast. Business partners who'd once praised his vision suddenly needed time. Friends who laughed loudest at his jokes were suddenly unreachable. That's how it goes. Confidence is contagious until it isn't. Once the illusion cracks, nobody wants to be standing too close. My life, on the other hand, snapped back into its normal rhythm quicker than I expected. Projects don't pause for family drama. Crews still show up. Deadlines still matter. Stone still has to be set level or it fails. There was comfort in that, the honesty of it. One afternoon, a junior project manager pulled me aside at a site and asked if everything was okay. She'd seen the news. I told her the truth. "It's messy," I said, "but it's handled." She nodded and went back to work without another word. No pity, no curiosity, just trust. That moment mattered more than she probably realized. The calls I did take were from people who'd known me before everything broke. Old clients, industry peers, a couple of city contacts who wanted to make sure I was insulated from any splash damage. They weren't calling out of sympathy. They were calling because credibility sticks when it's built slowly. One night, weeks later, my father asked me something that caught me off guard. We were sitting on the porch, the air warm, the sound of crickets steady and grounding. He stared out at the yard for a long time before speaking. "Did you always know?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I just stopped ignoring the signs. He nodded like that made sense. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You were always paying attention. Gregory was always performing." That was it. No speeches, no regret-soaked monologue, just a truth that had taken all of us too long to see. The legal process dragged on, slow and deliberate, charges stacked, evidence compiled, timelines reconstructed. I stayed out of it unless I was needed. I wasn't interested in a spectacle. Justice doesn't need an audience to work. What surprised me most was how little I wanted revenge once everything was exposed. I'd imagined anger fueling me, keeping me sharp, but anger burns hot and fast. What I felt instead was clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to be understood by people who never intended to understand you. I didn't change how I lived. Same truck, same boots, same early mornings, same satisfaction of watching something come together piece by piece. Money still wasn't the point. It never had been. What mattered was control of my work, my values, my boundaries. A few months later, I ran into my ex by accident. Grocery store aisle. Awkward smiles. He tried to make conversation, mentioned how impressive everything turned out, how he'd always believed I was capable of more. I wished him well and walked away before nostalgia could lie to me. Some chapters don't need revisiting. That night, I sat alone in my living room, paperwork spread across the table, planning the next expansion. New hires, new territory, bigger responsibility. I felt calm, grounded, earned. I realized something then. The party wasn't the turning point. The arrest wasn't the turning point. The turning point was the moment I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who benefited from doubting it. Everything after that was just logistics.
By the time winter rolled in, the noise had faded. Not disappeared, just dulled into background static. The kind you learn to live with once you realize it can't hurt you anymore. The headlines slowed, the calls tapered off. Life didn't reset, it stabilized. That was the real shift. I started traveling again, not for escape, just for work. Site visits, city meetings, long flights with my notebook open, sketching layouts and timelines while other passengers watched movies. Building things has always been how I process the world. When chaos shows up, I give it structure. One evening, after a long day on a municipal project, I sat alone in a hotel bar nursing a club soda and overheard two people at the next table talking about my brother's case. Not in detail, just enough to recognize the story. A financial guy who flew too close to the sun. A family angle that made it messier. They didn't know it was my family. I didn't correct them. I listened and felt nothing. That's when I knew it was over. Not legally, not formally, but emotionally. The part of me that had carried embarrassment like a second skin finally let it go. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't vindicated either. I was free. At work, things kept moving forward. New contracts came in, bigger ones, more complex ones, the kind that require trust before they require talent. My team grew. People who didn't care about my last name or my family history. People who showed up, did the work, and went home proud of what they'd built that day. I saw myself in them sometimes. Quiet, focused, uninterested in applause. My father's health stabilized more than we'd expected. With proper oversight and less stress, the fog lifted enough for him to enjoy his days again. He took pride in small routines, morning coffee, tending the garden, calling me to ask questions he already knew the answer to, just to hear my voice. I never rushed those calls. My mother adjusted in her own way. Less certainty, fewer declarations. She stopped bragging about anyone, started asking questions instead. Real ones. We didn't suddenly become close, but the dynamic shifted. Respect replaced assumption.
It was overdue. One afternoon, months after everything had settled, I found myself driving past the hotel where it had all started. The ballroom, the terrace, the night I'd been laughed at. I pulled over without thinking and walked through the lobby like a stranger. The plaque was still there, my company's name etched cleanly into metal. I stood there for a moment, watching people pass by without noticing it. That felt right. Because real work doesn't need witnesses to matter. Later that week, Henry and I met for lunch. Same quiet spot, same corner table. He asked how I was doing. I told him the truth. Better than before, I said. Not lighter, just steadier. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. You didn't rush it, he said. That's why it held. He was right. Everything I'd built, my company, my boundaries, my sense of self, had been built the same way. Slowly, intentionally, with room for stress without collapse. That night, back home, I reviewed a proposal for a major redevelopment project. Big budget, big visibility. The kind of thing my brother would have chased for status alone. I approved it not because it looked impressive, but because it made sense. The numbers were solid, the impact was real, the team was ready. I shut down my computer and leaned back, letting the quiet settle. I thought about the person I'd been at that party, standing there, smiling through humiliation, wondering what I'd done wrong. I wished I could tell her something simple. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to explain yourself better. You don't need to become what they understand. You just need to stop shrinking for people who grow by stepping on others. Everything else takes care of itself. 1 month later, I was standing on a site just outside the city as the sun crept up over unfinished stone and steel. The crew moved with quiet confidence, checking levels, tightening bolts, doing the kind of work that doesn't make headlines, but lasts longer than most people's reputations. The air smelled like wet concrete and fresh soil. My boots were dusty, my hands were rough, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly where it was supposed to be. The fallout from my brother's arrest had run its course through the news cycle. A few headlines, a few opinion pieces, then silence. Federal charges moved forward. State investigations followed. His accounts were frozen, his company dissolved almost overnight. The merger he'd built his ego around vanished like it had never existed. People who once lined up to shake his hand suddenly didn't remember his number. I stayed out of it. No interviews, no statements, no victory lap. His wife filed for divorce within days. I heard about it secondhand. Apparently, she moved fast. Some people are incredible at landing on their feet, as long as someone else cushions the fall. My ex tried reaching out too. Voicemails, texts, a sudden interest in catching up. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, just clarity. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to remind you how far you've walked. The money my brother took from my father was being clawed back through the system, but I didn't wait. I cleared the lien on my parents' house myself, set up proper legal protections, put professionals in place. No shortcuts, no family favors, just safeguards. My father's health improved once the stress lifted. He started sleeping better, eating better, spending hours in the garden again, talking to his plants like they were old friends. He called me a few times a week just to talk, about nothing. Those calls meant everything. My mother and I had a long, quiet conversation one afternoon. No apologies, that's not how she operates. But she said something honest. She admitted she'd trusted titles and confidence over consistency. She said she should have asked me more questions instead of assuming she understood. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was real, and sometimes that's enough to move forward. Work never slowed down. If anything, it picked up. New clients, bigger projects, real opportunities, the kind built on trust, not noise.
I walked sites, reviewed plans, hired carefully, led quietly. Watching my team succeed felt better than any applause ever could. One morning, my foreman texted to say the final system test was ready. I walked over to the control panel and flipped the switch. Water surged up in clean arcs, catching the light, breaking into tiny rainbows that hung in the air just long enough to be noticed. The crew cheered. Someone clapped me on the shoulder. That moment, that was the win. Not the arrest, not the exposure, not the silence afterward. This. Something real. Something built, something that would still be standing years from now. My phone buzzed again. A new client, a serious one, multi-million-dollar project. I glanced down at my boots, my hands, the people around me who trusted my decisions because I'd earned it. I answered the call without hesitation. Some people spend their lives chasing status, stepping on others to feel tall. They never notice the ground beneath them shifting until it's too late. Others keep their heads down, do the work, and build something solid enough to stand on. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly written off, then you already know which path lasts longer. Thank you for watching. More powerful stories are waiting on your screen right now. Click one and keep going. I'll see you in the next story.